So today I'd like to talk about Enrique Garcia and people that owned his guitars. But mostly I'd like to talk about Domingo Prat, who owned three of them. He owned a 1899 Enrique Garcia guitar. And he owned a 1902 number 22. And he owned number 264 out of the 272 that was made in 1922. Domingo Prat was born in 1886. His father, Thomas Prat, was a guitarist. And when Domingo was 12 years old, he began to study with Miguel Llobet in Barcelona. And he studied with Miguel until 1904, when Miguel left to go to Paris and associate with Debussy, Ravel, Ricardo Viñas, other well-known artists and composers, and do concerts there. Here's a copy of Historia de la Guitarra by Ricardo Muñoz. This was published in 1930. This particular edition was dedicated to Martin Heal. He was an astronomer, music critic. I'll show you a picture of Domingo. I have a huge section, plus an interview with his daughter in my annotations for the history of the classical guitar in Argentina, 1822 to 2000. It's 4 volumes, 21 pounds, available for $300 worldwide. Go on my homepage, and down at the bottom of the homepage you can click on it and pay for it by PayPal. But here's a picture from page 317. It's a picture of Domingo Prat. And he arrived in Buenos Aires on the 1st of January, New Year's Eve. I should say New Year's Day, 1908, and he brought an Enrique Garcia guitar with him, one of the two that he owned at the time, probably the 1902 being the newer model, I guess. And he did concerts about 5 months later. At that time, Domingo was about 21, 22 years old, and he brought the Tarraga school, the use of rest stroke, to Buenos Aires. Besides, a lot of guitarists were probably playing with bent fingers instead of straight fingers. But there was a big scene going on in Buenos Aires, which had been going on for decades in the 19th century, where they would play classical pieces as well as folkloric pieces of Argentina. And by 1912, Ramiro Irigoyen, a music store in Buenos Aires, had a contract with Enrique Garcia to bring in guitars. I did a talk a couple months ago. I'll repeat a little bit of it because we're talking about Enrique Garcia. On the 31st of October, 2022 is the 100th anniversary of his passing. Today being the 18th. So Francisco Tarraga owned 2 guitars made in 1904 and 1906, number 43 in 1904. Number 74, made in 1906. We have number 81 from 1907. Beautiful Brazilian rosewood back and sides. I have 3 Enrique Garcia guitars in stock. I might show you another one. This one's from 1897. It's maple back and sides. At this time they were unnumbered, In 1900, he started numbering them. And I also have number 244 from 1921. There were 28 guitars made after this by Enrique Garcia. This one belonged to Cedar Viglietti. He's quoted on 17 pages in my book due to his contributions from his book that he wrote, Origen y Historia de la Guitarra, Origin and History of the Guitar. Published that in 1973. But he had bought this guitar in 1954. I had Paris Banchetti do the restoration on it. We've done videos playing J.S. Bach with Sebastian Quintero playing this. I've done videos as well, but I'm an old codger by now, more of a historian than a guitarist. So Luis Cordero, the grandson of Dr. Fernando Cruz Cordero, he owned a Enrique Garcia guitar. As I mentioned, Martin Heel had one. Adolfo Luna eventually got a hold of the 1904 Targa one, number 43, after Francisco passed away. And he used that to record in 1929 Peruvian piece that I have the recording of in my collection on Discos Nacional Odeon. Good friend of Ricardo Muñoz's in Barcelona would send photos of Segovia in a bathing suit, stuff like that, to Ricardo Muñoz. Juan Ruano was the secretary of the Peña Guitaristica Targa. He owned a number 213 made in 1919. Recording artist, concert guitarist Juan Parras del Moral owned one. Targa student Pepita Roca owned one. Mariano Curbus Martin owned one. Julio Segreras plays his Enrique Garcia. You can go on YouTube and listen to a video of him playing that particular guitar. In 1917, he had a piece of sheet music that is shown in my book, in the early part of it, Volume 1, where it said Guitarras Garcia, flanking the edges of the sheet music cover. Emilio Pujol owned a 1902 and a 1905. You can see a video in Spanish and Catalan on YouTube where it mentions the 1905 Emilio Pujol Enrique Garcia guitar was stolen. They eventually got it back. That's mentioned in the video. Antonio Sinopoli and his student Adela Del Valle also both owned Enrique Garcia guitars. Francisco Alfonso also played a Garcia. He also owned a Santos Hernandez guitar. Maria Luisa Nito owned a 1918. She used that in recordings with Miguel Ubet in the late 20s. Agustin Barrios owned one dated 1923. It was probably under construction when Enrique was still alive, but it was not finished until the early part of 1923 by Francisco Simplicio and Miguel Simplicio. They had both worked with Enrique Garcia. Miguel said in an interview in the early 30s in a newspaper that he had worked in the Enrique Garcia shop since 1920. A gentleman, Virgilio Manasco Raffo, owned a 1918 Enrique Garcia, number 195. That's now in my colleague Richard Brunet in his collection. Richard wrote the foreword to my book. I've known Richard to talk to on the phone since 1987. We've met personally, face-to-face, a couple times at the Guitaradas in San Francisco at the Conservatory of Music. Back to the list here. 1919, It was at number 216, belonged to Renata Tarago. She did recording some LPs about 1960 or so. Taraga student Maria Palanca, owned in 1905. Daniel Fortea, Taraga student, concert guitarist, he owned in 1904. Recently found a 1917 photo of a mention in a newspaper in Spain of him playing a concert, and I get that on my website, findfretted.com. My buddy has a 1912 number 132 at Richard Brunet's shop in Wakanda, Illinois. Presently, if you're there, you could drop in and play it, purchase it. Shel Ehrlich owns number 268, almost at the end of the realm of Enrique Garcia's fabulous making. Enrique Garcia won a first prize award in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair. The 1897 maple I showed you was made 4 years later. Granada guitar maker John Ray, he restored number 146 from 1913. Have 1905 number 46, Santiago de Cecilia did the restoration on that. Marcelino Lopez Nieto did the restoration in 1973 of a 1916 number 177. My colleague John Harris, about 25 years ago, he bought a 1933 Santos Hernandez from my shop. It was used by Abel Calavaro for recordings about 1958, and he also, as a collector of great instruments, he owns a 1915 number 162. This is at the Conservatory of Music in San Francisco. People that visit up there. There was a 1901 number 11 that belonged to my colleague Heiko Leopold in Vintage Guitars, Vintage World Guitar in Germany. In the 1920 Romero and Fernandez catalog, in the late teens, Romero y Agra Mayor changed to Romero y Fernandez, and so in the 1920 catalog, Jobet, Pujol, Segreras, Sinopoli, Del Valle, Prat were all mentioned in advertising in that catalog. Josefina Robledo, also a Taraga student, child prodigy. She used a Simplicio, possibly a Garcia as well. When Taraga was in England, he had a Dr. Walter Leckie, and he owned a Enrique Garcia guitar as well. Recently saw a photo of Dr. Walter Leckie holding a René Lecoq guitar. We have one in stock currently. And so Domingo Prat was a big influence upon Buenos Aires and the acceptance and the rapture for the Enrique Garcia guitars. He brought one in January of 1908, did concerts at the Opera Italiani in May of 1908. Juana Lice, who was going to pass away about 6 years later, he was really in love with the idea of being able to help Domingo. So there's a story in my book about how Juana Lice was passing out flyers for the concert for the Domingo Prat May 1908 concert, where he used his Enrique Garcia guitar. Juana Lice was a great folk player, published a lot of works in the 1880s, did a lot of concerts. They called him El Inglés. Thank you.